In the deepest reaches of space, where ancient empires span galaxies and dragons rule from crystalline thrones, humanity was nothing more than a footnote in cosmic history. We were the mechanics, the engineers, the ones who fixed what the mighty had broken. But, sometimes, the most insignificant touch can reshape the universe itself. When maintenance worker Jake Morrison was assigned to repair the life support systems aboard the Dracorian Empire's flagship, he thought it would be just another routine job. The dragons barely acknowledged human existence, treating them as useful tools at best. What Jake didn't know was that their immortal queen lay dying in the depths of the ship, her ancient power fading after millennia of rule. What he couldn't have imagined was that his calloused human hands carried something the dragons had lost eons ago, something that would not only save their dying queen but reveal a truth about humanity that would send shockwaves through every corner of the galaxy. One accidental touch. One dying queen. One species about to discover they were never as insignificant as they believed. The cosmos was about to learn why humans survive where others perish, why they thrive in the spaces between greatness, and why sometimes the smallest spark can reignite the mightiest flame. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his grease-stained coveralls, leaving yet another dark smudge across his weathered face. The massive wrench in his hands felt heavier with each passing hour, but the atmospheric recycling unit aboard the Dracorian flagship Eternal Flame wasn't going to repair itself. Around him, the ship hummed with an alien energy that made his teeth ache, a constant reminder that he was very far from home and very much out of place. The corridor stretched before him like the inside of some great beast, with walls that curved organically and seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Everything about Dracorian architecture was designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of the immense power and ancient heritage of the Dragon Empire. The ceiling soared 40 feet above his head, adorned with intricate carvings that told stories of conquest spanning thousands of years. Even the air felt different here, thick with the weight of centuries and the lingering scent of something like cinnamon mixed with ozone. Jake had been working maintenance contracts on alien vessels for the better part of 15 years, ever since humanity had been grudgingly accepted into the Galactic Trade Consortium as a junior member species. Humans, it turned out, had a particular talent for fixing things that other species considered irreparably broken. They called it human ingenuity, though Jake suspected it was really just human stubbornness and an unwillingness to accept that something couldn't be made to work again. The dragons, however, were different from his usual clients. Where the Zephyrians were chatty and eager to explain every detail of their technology, and the crystalline collective communicated through harmonic frequencies that at least acknowledged his presence, the dragons barely seemed to notice he existed at all. In the 3 days he'd been aboard the Eternal Flame, he'd seen exactly 7 of them, and none had spoken so much as a word in his direction. It wasn't personal, Jake told himself as he crawled deeper into the maintenance shaft. Dragons simply operated on a different scale than humans. They lived for thousands of years, ruled entire star systems, and commanded respect from species that could crack planets in half. A human maintenance worker was probably about as significant to them as a bacterium was to him. The atmospheric unit groaned beneath his hands, a sound that spoke of metal fatigue and systems pushed beyond their design limits. Jake frowned as he ran his diagnostic scanner over the primary intake manifold. According to his readings, this unit should have been replaced about 3 centuries ago. The fact that it was still functioning at all was a testament to Dracorian engineering, but even the best technology had limits. "Computer," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Access maintenance logs for atmospheric unit 77 Alpha." The response came in the form of flowing Dracorian script that appeared on a holographic display, utterly incomprehensible to human eyes. Jake sighed and pulled out his translation device, a bulky piece of human tech that the dragons tolerated but clearly found primitive. "Maintenance logs," the device announced in its tinny voice, "last updated 243 years, 4 months, 17 days ago. Primary technician, Vorthak the Eternal. Status, operational within acceptable parameters." Jake shook his head. Acceptable parameters for a dragon apparently meant anything that hadn't actually exploded yet. He'd seen this before on long-lived species vessels. When you had millennia to work with, you tended to put off routine maintenance until it became an emergency. The problem was that emergency repairs in deep space had a way of becoming fatal disasters. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he began disassembling the intake assembly. Each component told a story of gradual degradation, of systems slowly wearing down under the constant strain of keeping a massive starship habitable. The primary filter was so clogged it was a miracle any air was moving through the system at all. The secondary bypass had been jury-rigged with what looked like parts cannibalized from a dozen different systems, a patchwork of fixes that had somehow kept everything running for longer than it had any right to. As he worked, Jake became aware of something else, a subtle wrongness in the ship's ambient energy field. It was like a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony, so faint that it took him several minutes to even notice it. His translation device wasn't equipped to analyze energy patterns, but his own enhanced senses, modified years ago to help him work with alien technology, could pick up on things that most humans would miss entirely. The ship was dying. Not quickly, and not obviously, but something fundamental was wrong with the eternal flame. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about atmospheric recycling. The entire vessel was slowly losing the energy that kept it functioning, like a battery running down after too many years of use. Jake paused in his work, considering whether he should report his findings to the ship's crew. In his experience, alien species didn't always appreciate humans pointing out flaws in their technology, especially when those humans were supposed to be simple maintenance workers. On the other hand, if the ship's power source was failing, everyone aboard was in serious danger. He made his decision and activated his comm unit. "Morrison to bridge," he called, hoping someone would answer. Silence stretched for nearly a minute before a voice responded, speaking in Dracorian. Jake's translation device kicked in a moment later. "Human, you are to complete your assigned tasks and avoid unnecessary communications." "I understand," Jake replied, "but I think there might be a problem with the ship's primary power systems. I'm reading energy fluctuations that suggest your concerns are noted and dismissed. Continue your work." The communication channel closed with an abrupt click, leaving Jake alone with his growing worry. He'd done his duty by reporting it, but the dragons clearly weren't interested in listening to a human's concerns. That was their prerogative, but it didn't sit well with him. In his experience, ignoring warning signs was a good way to end up floating in vacuum. Jake returned to his work on the atmospheric unit, but his mind kept wandering to the energy readings he was picking up. The fluctuations seemed to be coming from deeper within the ship, somewhere below the engineering decks where his security clearance didn't allow him to go. Whatever was causing them, it was big, and it was getting worse. 3 hours later, he had the atmospheric unit running at 97% efficiency, well within any reasonable definition of operational parameters. The work had been challenging but straightforward, requiring more patience than skill. As he packed up his tools, Jake made a decision that would change the course of his life, though he didn't know it at the time. Instead of heading back to his assigned quarters, he decided to do a little unauthorized exploring. The energy fluctuations were stronger now, and his curiosity had gotten the better of him. If the dragons wouldn't listen to his concerns, maybe he could at least figure out what was causing them. The corridors of the eternal flame were laid out in a pattern that seemed to follow no human logic. Passages curved and branched seemingly at random, leading to chambers whose purposes Jake could only guess at. He followed the energy readings deeper into the ship, using his enhanced senses to navigate through sections that were clearly off-limits to non-dragons. The deeper he went, the more obvious it became that something was seriously wrong. The walls themselves seemed dimmer than they should be, their organic glow faded to a sickly pallor. The air tasted stale despite the freshly repaired recycling systems, and the constant hum of the ship's systems had taken on an irregular rhythm that set his nerves on edge. Jake found himself in a section of the ship that was clearly ancient, even by Dracorian standards. The walls here were covered with carvings so old they were worn almost smooth, depicting scenes of dragons in flight among the stars. The artistic style was different from what he'd seen elsewhere on the ship, more primitive but somehow more powerful, as if the artists had been trying to capture something beyond mere representation. The energy readings were strongest here, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat, but one that was growing weaker with each cycle. Jake followed the signal through a maze of corridors that seemed to spiral inward toward the heart of the ship. Whatever he was approaching, it was big, ancient, and failing. He almost turned back when he reached the massive door that blocked his path. It was clearly designed to keep people out, standing nearly 20 feet tall and carved from what looked like a single piece of black stone. Dracorian script covered its surface in spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly, and Jake's translation device refused to even attempt a reading. But the door was open, just a crack, as if whoever had last passed through hadn't quite managed to seal it properly. The energy readings were coming from beyond that door, and they were getting weaker by the hour. Jake stood there for a long moment, knowing that he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His enhanced senses were screaming at him that whatever lay beyond that door was important, possibly more important than anything he'd ever encountered. The rational part of his mind reminded him that he was just a maintenance worker with no business poking around in the restricted sections of an alien warship. But the part of him that had spent 15 years fixing impossible problems refused to walk away from something that was clearly broken. Jake squeezed through the gap in the door and found himself in a chamber that took his breath away. The room was vast, easily 100 meters across and half as high, with walls that seemed to be made of living crystal. The crystals pulsed with inner light, but that light was fading, growing dimmer even as he watched. And, in the center of the chamber, lying on what could only be described as a throne made of starlight and shadow, was the most magnificent creature Jake had ever seen. She was a dragon, but unlike any dragon he'd imagined from human legends or Dracorian art. Her scales were the color of deep space, so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, but shot through with veins of silver that pulsed in time with the crystal walls. She was easily 40 feet from nose to tail, with wings that were folded around her body like a cloak. Even unconscious, she radiated power and ancient wisdom. But she was dying. Jake didn't need his enhanced senses to tell him that. The dragon's breathing was shallow and irregular, and the silver veins in her scales were growing dim. The entire chamber was fading along with her, as if her life force was somehow connected to the ship's power systems. Jake approached the throne carefully, acutely aware that he was probably committing several dozen capital crimes just by being here. This had to be someone important, possibly the most important dragon in the Empire. The chamber itself spoke of millennia of reverence and worship, of a being so ancient and powerful that even other dragons bowed before her. As he drew closer, Jake could see that the dragon's condition was even worse than he'd initially thought. Her breathing was becoming more labored with each passing moment, and the silver veins in her scales were flickering like dying stars. Whatever was wrong with her, she didn't have long left. Jake stood at the base of the crystal throne, looking up at the dying dragon queen, and felt something he'd never experienced before. It wasn't just sympathy or professional curiosity. It was a deep, almost instinctual need to help, to fix what was broken, to find a way to make things right again. He'd felt it before with machines and systems, but never with a living being. Without really thinking about what he was doing, Jake reached out and placed his hand on the dragon's flank, just above where her heart would be. Her scales were surprisingly warm to the touch, and he could feel the weak flutter of her pulse beneath his palm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, everything changed. The moment Jake's skin made contact with the dragon's scales, energy exploded through the chamber like a supernova. The crystal walls blazed with renewed light, and the silver veins in the dragon's scales flared so brightly that Jake had to squeeze his eyes shut. The ship's power systems, which had been failing for months, suddenly surged back to full capacity and beyond. And the Dragon Queen opened her eyes. They were silver, like molten starlight, and ancient beyond human comprehension. As her gaze fixed on Jake, he felt the full weight of her intelligence pressing against his mind, exploring, questioning, understanding. In that moment, he knew that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. The Dragon Queen raised her massive head and spoke, her voice like distant thunder rolling across an endless sky. "Human," she said, and the word carried the weight of prophecy. "What have you done?" Jake stared up at her, his hands still pressed against her scales, and realized he had absolutely no idea how to answer that question. All he knew was that something fundamental had just changed, not just for him or for the Dragon Queen, but for the entire galaxy. The energy still flowing between them carried information, knowledge, possibilities that his human mind could barely begin to process. In the distance, alarms began to sound throughout the eternal flame, and Jake could hear the thunderous footsteps of dragons running toward the chamber. Whatever he had just awakened, the entire ship knew about it now. The Dragon Queen's court was coming, and they were going to want answers that Jake wasn't sure he could provide. The Queen's eyes never left his face as she slowly sat up on her crystal throne, her massive form radiating power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "You have given me something I had forgotten I could possess," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You have given me hope. Now, little human, we must discover what that means for all of us." The chamber doors exploded inward with a sound like breaking thunder, and, suddenly, Jake found himself surrounded by the most terrifying collection of beings he had ever encountered. Dragons poured into the crystal chamber, their scales gleaming in colors that spanned the entire spectrum and beyond. Some were massive, easily twice the size of the queen, while others were more compact but radiated an intensity that made Jake's enhanced senses scream warnings. All of them had their attention fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like a mouse surrounded by hungry cats. The first to speak was a dragon whose scales shifted between deep red and molten gold, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Seize the human! He has violated the sacred chamber and somehow compromised our queen's stasis." Jake instinctively stepped backward, but his hand remained in contact with the queen's flank. The moment he tried to pull away, her massive claw settled gently but firmly over his wrist, holding him in place. The gesture was subtle, almost protective, and it sent a clear message to the assembled court. "Silence, Vorthak," the queen said, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. The dragon who had been giving orders immediately dropped into a deep bow, his aggressive posture evaporating in an instant. "This human has not violated anything. He has accomplished what none of you could in 3 centuries of trying." The queen's words hung in the air like a physical presence, and Jake could feel the confusion and shock rippling through the assembled dragons. He still didn't understand what had happened when he touched her, but clearly it was significant beyond anything he could have imagined. The energy still flowing between them carried information, fragments of knowledge that his human mind was struggling to process. "My queen," another dragon spoke, this one with scales like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with inner fire, "you have been in stasis for 300 years. Your life force was fading beyond our ability to sustain. How is it possible that a mere human could what, THYSS, the queen interrupted, and Jake felt a ripple of something that might have been amusement in the energy connection between them. Could succeed where the combined wisdom of the Dracorian Empire failed? Could accomplish in a single touch what your greatest healers could not achieve in centuries of effort? The dragon called THYSS lowered her head, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of the queen's words. Jake was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into something much larger than a simple medical emergency. The queen's condition, her 3-century stasis, the ship's failing power systems, it was all connected, and somehow his touch had changed everything. "Perhaps," the queen continued, her silver eyes never leaving Jake's face, "it is time we reconsidered our assumptions about humanity." That statement sent a visible shock wave through the assembled court. Jake could see scales bristling and hear the low rumbles of displeasure from some of the larger dragons. Clearly, the idea that humans might be more than simple maintenance workers was not a popular one in Dracorian society. Vorthak, the red and gold dragon who had initially demanded Jake's arrest, raised his head with obvious reluctance. "My queen, with the greatest respect, humans are a young species with no significant power or heritage. They lack the ancient bloodlines, the connection to the cosmic forces that govern life and death. It is impossible that this creature could possess abilities that we do not." Jake felt the queen's amusement grow stronger, and, through their connection, he began to sense something that made his blood run cold. She knew something about humanity that the rest of the dragons did not, something that explained what had just happened. And, whatever it was going to change everything. "Tell me, Vorthak," the queen said, her voice deceptively casual, "what do you know of the Great Silence?" The question hit the assembled dragons like a physical blow. Jake could see several of them actually step backward, and the energy in the chamber took on a distinctly uncomfortable quality. Vorthak's scales shifted from red and gold to a deep, troubled purple. "My queen, the Great Silence is legend, myth, a story told to younglings to explain the gaps in our historical records. It has no bearing on the present situation," the queen finished. "I think you will find that it has every bearing, old friend. The Great Silence was not myth. It was the price we paid for our survival, and the reason we forgot what we once knew about the younger species." Jake felt his heart racing as pieces of some vast puzzle began to fall into place in his mind. The energy connection with the queen was growing stronger, and with it came fragments of memory that were not his own. Images of ancient battles fought among the stars, of species that had once possessed power beyond imagination, of a great catastrophe that had reshaped the galaxy itself. The humans, the Queen continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, were not always as they appear now. They are the descendants of the ancients, the first species to achieve true mastery over the fundamental forces of existence. They were our teachers, our guides, our partners in exploring the deepest mysteries of the universe. The chamber erupted in chaos. Dragons roared in disbelief, their voices creating a cacophony that made the crystal walls ring like bells. Jake could hardly process what he was hearing. According to the Queen, humanity had once been a species of cosmic significance, teachers to the dragons themselves. It seemed impossible, but the energy flowing between him and the Queen carried the weight of absolute truth. The war came suddenly, the Queen continued, speaking over the noise of her court, fought against enemies from beyond our galaxy who sought to consume all life. The ancients, the true humans, sacrificed themselves to seal the barriers between dimensions, but the cost was almost beyond comprehension. Their civilization fell, their knowledge was scattered, and their descendants were left with only fragments of their former greatness. Jake stared up at the Queen, his mind reeling. Are you saying that humanity used to be some kind of super-advanced species? That we gave up our power to save the galaxy? Not gave up, the Queen corrected, and Jake could feel her ancient sadness through their connection. Were forced to abandon. The ritual that sealed the dimensional barriers required the ancients to sever their connection to the cosmic forces, to become ordinary mortals. They knew that their descendants would have to rediscover their heritage slowly, over millennia, or risk attracting the attention of the things they had locked away. THYSS, the obsidian-scaled dragon, spoke up with obvious skepticism. Even if this legend were true, my Queen, it still does not explain how this human could restore your failing life force. The connection to cosmic energy cannot simply be reawakened by touch. Jake felt the Queen's attention focus on him with laser-like intensity, and, suddenly, he understood. The energy flowing between them wasn't just healing her, it was awakening something in him as well. Memories that weren't quite memories, knowledge that he had never learned, an awareness of forces and possibilities that his conscious mind couldn't quite grasp. Show them, the Queen said softly, her voice meant for Jake alone. I don't know how, Jake replied, but, even as he spoke, he could feel something stirring deep within his consciousness. It was like discovering a room in his house that he had never known existed, filled with tools and knowledge that were somehow intimately familiar. You do know, the Queen insisted. You have always known. You simply forgot how to remember. Jake closed his eyes and let himself sink deeper into the energy connection. What he found there defied every assumption he had ever made about himself, about humanity, about the nature of reality itself. The power was there, had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to awaken. Not magic, not supernatural ability, but a fundamental understanding of how life and energy interacted at the deepest levels of existence. When he opened his eyes again, Jake was no longer quite human in the way he had been before. The change was subtle but unmistakable. His enhanced senses, which had been artificial modifications designed to help him work with alien technology, were now natural extensions of abilities he had always possessed. The energy patterns of the ship, of the dragons, of the Queen herself, were as clear to him as visual light. He looked up at the assembled court and saw them not just as magnificent alien beings, but as complex patterns of life force and cosmic energy. Most of them were healthy and strong, their energy flowing in stable, predictable patterns. But some showed signs of the same degradation that had nearly killed the Queen, a slow disconnection from the fundamental forces that sustained all life. The Dracorian Empire is dying, Jake said, the words coming from knowledge he didn't remember acquiring. Not quickly, and not obviously, but your species is slowly losing its connection to the cosmic energy that gives you your power and longevity. It's been happening for centuries, so gradually that you haven't noticed the decline. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Jake could feel the shock and denial radiating from the assembled dragons, but he could also sense the deeper recognition. They knew he was right, even if they didn't want to admit it. The Queen's condition was just the most advanced case, Jake continued, his voice growing more confident as he accessed knowledge that felt ancient and familiar. She was trying to hold the entire empire together through sheer force of will, channeling her own life force to maintain the connections that were naturally deteriorating. It nearly killed her. Vorthak took a step forward, his scales now a deep, troubled blue. If what you say is true, human, then what can be done? How can we restore what has been lost? Jake looked up at the Queen, and, through their connection, he could feel her ancient hope and determination. She had known this day would come, had been waiting centuries for the right catalyst to begin the process of restoration. The same way it was restored in me, Jake said. Through connection, through remembering what was forgotten, through rebuilding the bridges between species that were severed during the Great Silence. Humanity and the dragons were partners once. We can be again. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was different. Instead of denial and disbelief, Jake could sense excitement, possibility, desperate hope. The dragons were beginning to understand that he wasn't just offering a solution to their queen's condition, he was offering a path to salvation for their entire species. But not everyone was convinced. A massive dragon with scales like burnished copper and eyes like dying stars pushed his way to the front of the crowd. Jake's enhanced senses immediately identified him as different from the others, older and more powerful, but also more isolated from the cosmic forces that sustained the others. I am Morzak the Eternal, the Copper Dragon announced, his voice carrying the authority of ages. I have ruled alongside our queen for over 2 millennia, and I have never heard such nonsense. This human speaks of legends and myths as if they were established fact. He claims abilities that no human has ever possessed. I say he has somehow used alien technology to create the illusion of healing, and we are being deceived. Jake felt the queen's tension through their connection. Morzak was clearly someone whose opinion carried significant weight in the court, and his opposition could undermine everything they were trying to accomplish. Morzak, the queen said carefully, you have served faithfully for centuries. Your wisdom has guided the empire through many crises. But, in this matter, you are wrong. Am I? Morzak's eyes blazed with inner fire as he focused his attention on Jake. Then, let this human prove his claims. Let him demonstrate these supposed ancient abilities on someone other than you, my queen. If he can truly restore our connection to the cosmic forces, let him heal the degradation in my own energy patterns. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Through his enhanced awareness, he could see that Morzak's condition was far worse than any of the others. The copper dragon was literally dying from the inside out, his connection to the life forces so severed that Jake wasn't sure it could be restored. If he failed, it would not only prove Morzak right, it might kill them both. But, the queen's hand tightened slightly on his wrist, and, through their connection, he felt her absolute confidence in his abilities. She believed he could do this, believed it with a certainty that went beyond hope or faith. She knew something about what he had become, about what humanity was capable of, that even he didn't fully understand yet. Jake looked up at Morzak and nodded. I'll do it. But, I need to warn you, this isn't going to be comfortable. Reconnecting to the cosmic forces after being severed from them for so long is going to feel like coming back to life after being dead for centuries. Morzak's laugh was like grinding stone. Human, I have faced enemies that could shatter planets and survived wounds that would kill lesser beings. I think I can handle whatever discomfort you might cause. Jake stepped away from the queen, feeling the energy connection between them stretch but not break, and approached the ancient copper dragon. Up close, Morzak was even more magnificent and terrifying than he had appeared from a distance. His scales were like polished metal, and his eyes held the accumulated wisdom and cynicism of millennia. Last chance to change your mind, Jake said, raising his hand toward Morzak's flank. Do your worst, little human. Jake placed his palm against the copper dragon's scales and immediately understood why the queen had been so confident. The power that had awakened in him wasn't his alone, it was humanity's heritage, the accumulated knowledge and ability of the ancients flowing through him. And, the ancients had been very, very good at healing. The energy that exploded between Jake and Morzak was different from what he had experienced with the queen. Where her healing had been gentle and restorative, this was like setting off controlled explosions inside a dying star. Morzak's severed connections to the cosmic forces had to be rebuilt from scratch, and the process was as violent as it was miraculous. The copper dragon's roar shook the crystal chamber as centuries of accumulated damage was burned away in moments. His scales blazed with inner light, and his eyes became like twin suns. The other dragons in the chamber stepped back as waves of power rolled off Morzak's transforming body. When the energy discharge finally ended, Morzak stood transformed. His copper scales had taken on a brilliant golden sheen, and his eyes burned with the same silver fire that Jake had seen in the Queen's gaze. More importantly, Jake could see through his enhanced awareness that the ancient dragon's connection to the cosmic forces had been completely restored. Morzak stared down at Jake with an expression of absolute shock. What have you done to me? I feel like I did in my first century of life, but more. The energy, the connection, it's stronger than it ever was before. Jake smiled tiredly, the effort of the healing having drained him more than he had expected. I gave you back what you lost, and maybe a little bit more. The ancients weren't just connected to the cosmic forces, they enhanced them, made them stronger and more stable. That's part of what you're feeling now. The silence in the chamber was profound as the implications of what they had just witnessed sank in. Jake had not only proven his claims beyond any doubt, he had demonstrated that humanity's lost abilities could make the dragons stronger than they had ever been before. The Queen rose from her crystal throne, her massive form radiating power and majesty. My court, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, you have seen the truth with your own eyes. The time of partnership between dragons and humans has begun again. We will heal our empire, restore our connection to the cosmos, and prepare for the challenges that lie ahead. She looked down at Jake, and, through their connection, he felt her ancient determination and hope. But, first, we must help our human friend understand what he has become, and what that means for both our species. The awakening of the ancient abilities is only the beginning. The real work starts now. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He had come aboard the Eternal Flame as a simple maintenance worker, but he was leaving as something entirely different. The galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict, and somehow he had become one of the key figures in that transformation. The Dragon Court began to disperse, but Jake could feel their attention still focused on him. He was no longer invisible to them, no longer just a useful tool. He had become something unprecedented, a human who remembered what humanity used to be, and who might help them become something even greater. As the last of the dragons filed out of the crystal chamber, the Queen settled back onto her throne and regarded Jake with those ancient silver eyes. Now, she said, her voice warm with anticipation, let us discuss what comes next. 3 days had passed since Jake's awakening, and the Eternal Flame was no longer the same ship. The corridors that had once hummed with failing energy now blazed with renewed power, their organic walls pulsing with vibrant light that seemed almost alive. Dragons who had moved with the careful deliberation of the elderly now flew through the vast spaces with the vigor of their youth, their scales gleaming with inner fire. The transformation was miraculous, but it was also just the beginning of something much larger. Jake stood in the Queen's private chambers, a space that defied every human conception of interior design. The walls were composed of living crystal that responded to the Queen's emotions, shifting through spectrums of color that had no names in any human language. Furniture seemed to grow from the floor itself, shaping itself to accommodate whoever might need it. At the moment, it had configured a chair-like structure that was almost comfortable for Jake's human proportions. The Queen herself had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. Where she had once been dying, faded, barely clinging to existence, she now radiated power that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential. Her dark scales had taken on an iridescent quality that reflected light from dimensions Jake's human eyes couldn't quite perceive, and her silver eyes burned with the accumulated wisdom of millennia. The reports from across the fleet are uniformly positive, she was saying, her voice carrying harmonics that Jake could now hear and understand. 17 ships have requested immediate visits from our human healer. The crew efficiency ratings have increased by 30% across all vessels. Even the artificial intelligences are running more smoothly now that the ship's power systems have been restored to full capacity. Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on the holographic displays that floated around the chamber's central area. They showed star charts of unprecedented complexity, mapping not just the physical locations of planets and systems, but the energy flows that connected them. It was like seeing the galaxy's nervous system laid bare, and what Jake saw there was deeply troubling. The problem is bigger than I thought, he said, gesturing toward a cluster of red zones on the display. It's not just the Dracorian Empire that's been affected by the degradation. Look at these energy patterns around the Zephyrian trade routes, and these dead zones in crystalline collective space. The disconnection from the cosmic forces is happening everywhere. The Queen's scales shifted through worried purples and deep blues as she studied the displays. How extensive is the damage? Jake manipulated the hologram, zooming out to show larger sections of the galaxy. From what I can determine using the ship's sensor networks, at least 60% of the known spacefaring species are showing signs of energy degradation. Some are worse than others, but the pattern is consistent across species lines, political boundaries, even dimensional barriers. The Great Silence was more comprehensive than we remembered, the Queen said, her voice heavy with ancient sorrow. When the ancients sealed the dimensional barriers, they didn't just sever humanity's connection to the cosmic forces. They severed everyone's connection, to prevent the entities from beyond from using those pathways to break back through. Jake felt a chill as the implications hit him. You're saying that every spacefaring species in the galaxy has been slowly dying for the past 10,000 years, and none of them realized it? The process was so gradual, spanning so many generations, that it became the new normal. Species that had once lived for tens of thousands of years began aging and dying in mere millennia. Powers that had once been commonplace became the stuff of legend and myth. Entire civilizations forgot what they had once been capable of. The weight of that knowledge settled on Jake's shoulders like a physical burden. He wasn't just dealing with one dying dragon queen or one failing empire. He was looking at the slow-motion extinction of galactic civilization itself. But there's hope, the Queen continued, her scales brightening to more optimistic hues. Your awakening proves that the connections can be restored. The question is whether we can do it fast enough and on a large enough scale to make a difference. Jake studied the star charts, his enhanced awareness allowing him to see patterns and possibilities that his merely human consciousness never could have grasped. We need to accelerate the process. If I have to visit every ship, every world, every species personally, it'll take centuries. By then, many of the affected civilizations will have passed the point of no return. What do you propose? Jake manipulated the hologram again, highlighting specific star systems and energy nodes. The ancients didn't just have individual abilities, they built infrastructure. I can see traces of it in the deep structure of hyperspace, dormant relay stations and amplification nodes that have been powered down for millennia. If we can reactivate even a portion of that network, I might be able to channel healing energy across interstellar distances. The Queen's eyes blazed with excitement. The nexus points. I remember stories from my youth, tales of places where the barriers between dimensions were thin, where the ancients had built great works that could affect entire star systems. Most were thought to be destroyed during the war. Not destroyed, Jake corrected, his awareness penetrating deeper into the galactic energy matrix. Hidden. Sealed. Waiting for someone who remembered how to find them. He paused, studying the patterns more closely. There's one relatively close to here, maybe 2 days' travel at maximum hyperspace velocity. But reactivating it won't be simple. The ancients built in safeguards, tests to ensure that only those who truly understood the consequences could access the network. The Queen rose from her crystalline throne, her massive form towering over Jake but somehow not threatening. Then, we must attempt it. The alternative is to watch the galaxy slowly die around us. Jake nodded, but he could feel uncertainty gnawing at him. The power that had awakened within him was vast but unfamiliar, like having access to a library written in a language he was only just learning to read. The thought of attempting to reactivate ancient technology that had been dormant for 10 millennia was both exhilarating and terrifying. There's something else, he said reluctantly. When I heal people, you, Morzak, the others, I'm not just restoring their original connection to the cosmic forces. I'm making it stronger, more stable than it was before. The enhancement is automatic, built into the healing process itself. And, you see this as a problem? Jake gestured toward the holographic displays. Look at the energy readings from the healed dragons. They're not just healthy, they're radiating power at levels that exceed anything in your historical records. If we start healing entire species, entire civilizations, we're not going to be restoring the status quo. We're going to be creating something new. The Queen studied the displays, her ancient mind clearly working through the implications. Enhanced abilities, greater longevity, stronger connections to the fundamental forces of existence. For most species, these would be considered gifts beyond price. But, gifts that powerful come with responsibilities, and not everyone handles power well. Some species might see enhancement as an opportunity for conquest. Others might become dependent on the healing process, unable to maintain their abilities without constant intervention. The Queen's scales shifted through thoughtful patterns of gold and silver. These are valid concerns, but they pale in comparison to the alternative. Would you prefer to let civilizations die rather than risk the possibility that they might misuse enhanced abilities? Jake knew she was right, but the weight of responsibility was enormous. He was talking about fundamentally changing the nature of galactic civilization, about giving species powers that might reshape the political and social structures that had existed for millennia. Before he could respond, an urgent chime echoed through the chamber. The Queen's scales immediately shifted to alert patterns of red and orange as a holographic display materialized in the air between them. Vorthak's image appeared, his gold and red scales reflecting his agitation. "My Queen, we are receiving priority communications from across the Empire. Word of your recovery and the humans' abilities has spread faster than we anticipated. We have formal requests for healing assistance from the Zephyrian Consortium, the Crystalline Collective, and the Void Shepherds. More concerning, we're also receiving what can only be described as demands from the Hegemony of Steel and the Shadow Parliament." Jake felt his blood chill. Through his connection to the ship's information systems, he could access basic data about the major galactic powers. The Hegemony of Steel was a militaristic alliance known for settling disputes through force, while the Shadow Parliament operated from the Galactic Rim and was rumored to have technologies that bordered on the forbidden. "How did the information spread so quickly?" the Queen asked. "Unknown, my Queen. Our communications have been secured, but it's possible that other species have been monitoring our energy emissions. The restoration of your life force and the healing of the fleet would have created detectable disturbances across multiple dimensional layers." Jake closed his eyes and extended his enhanced awareness, probing the energy patterns around the eternal flame. What he found there made his stomach clench with worry. "We're being watched," he said. "Multiple species, multiple technologies. Some of them are trying to scan me specifically, to understand how the healing process works." The Queen's eyes blazed with protective fury. "No one probes what is mine without permission." "It's not about possession," Jake said quickly. "If hostile species can reverse engineer the healing process, they might be able to weaponize it. Enhanced abilities could be turned into enhanced destruction. We need to move carefully." Vorthak's image leaned forward. "My Queen, there's more. We're receiving intelligence reports that several major powers are mobilizing fleets. The official reason is to provide escort and protection for diplomatic missions, but the ship configurations suggest they're prepared for military action. They think we've discovered a new weapon," Jake realized. From their perspective, the sudden restoration of Dracorian power would look like a massive military advantage. They want to either control it or destroy it before we can use it against them. The Queen's massive head swung toward Jake, her silver eyes burning with determination. "How long until you can activate the ancient relay station you identified?" Jake checked the star charts again, his enhanced awareness calculating hyperspace routes and energy requirements. 2 days to reach it, assuming we can avoid the fleets that are probably already moving to intercept us. Then, maybe 6 to 12 hours to complete the activation process, if everything goes smoothly. And if everything doesn't go smoothly? Jake met her gaze steadily. Then, we might trigger a galactic war, accidentally destroy several star systems, or wake up things that the ancients locked away for very good reasons. But, if we don't try, the galaxy dies anyway, just more slowly. The Queen's scales shifted through patterns of determination and resolve. "Then, we move immediately. Vorthak, prepare the eternal flame for emergency hyperspace transit. Full stealth protocols, maximum velocity. Plot a course for the coordinates our friend will provide." "My Queen," Vorthak's image said uncertainly, "we could request diplomatic protection from the Galactic Trade Consortium, or perhaps negotiate with some of the approaching fleets. There might be a peaceful resolution to this situation." "There might be," the Queen agreed, "but there also might not be. And, every moment we delay, more beings across the galaxy slip closer to permanent disconnection from the life forces that sustain them. I will not gamble with the survival of galactic civilization for the sake of political convenience. Jake felt a surge of admiration for the ancient dragon's courage and determination. She was risking everything, her empire, her life, the safety of her people, on the possibility that he could accomplish something that had never been attempted before. "There's one more thing," he said. "The process of reactivating the relay station is going to require more power than I can generate alone. I'll need to be connected to the ship's energy systems, and to you. If something goes wrong, it could kill all of us." The Queen's laugh was like distant thunder, but warm with genuine humor. "Little human, I have been dying for 3 centuries. The prospect of risking death in order to save the galaxy seems like an acceptable trade." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of destiny settling around him like a cloak. In the space of 3 days, he had gone from being a simple maintenance worker to being one of the key figures in a plan to reshape galactic civilization. The transformation was dizzying, but he knew there was no going back. "All right," he said, calling up the star charts and highlighting their destination. "Let's go wake up some ancient technology and see if we can save the galaxy." The eternal flame shuddered as her engines came online, power flowing through systems that had been restored to capabilities their designers had never imagined. Outside the ship, Jake could sense other vessels moving in the darkness of space, hunters converging on prey they didn't fully understand. The race to save galactic civilization had begun, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that they were already behind. As the ship leaped into hyperspace, the Queen settled beside Jake's improvised chair, her massive presence both comforting and protective. Through their connection, he could feel her ancient determination and unshakable faith in what they were attempting. "Whatever happens next," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of certainty and hope, "you should know that you have already accomplished something miraculous. You have given an ancient species the chance to remember what we once were, and to become something greater than we ever imagined possible." Jake looked up at her, drawing strength from her confidence. "Let's just hope the galaxy is ready for what we're about to unleash." The Queen's scales shifted through patterns of anticipation and resolve. Ready or not, change is coming. The only question now is whether we can guide it in the right direction. In the depths of hyperspace, the eternal flame raced toward a destiny that would reshape the stars themselves. Behind them, fleets of unknown intent followed, and ahead lay technology so ancient and powerful that even its creators had feared what they had built. Jake closed his eyes and prepared himself for what might be the most important 24 hours in galactic history. The ancient relay station hung in space like a crystalline spider web the size of a small moon, its geometry so complex that Jake's human mind could only perceive fragments of its true structure at any given moment. Composed of materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, it pulsed with a faint energy signature that spoke of technologies beyond anything the current galactic civilizations had achieved. Jake stood on the bridge of the eternal flame, his enhanced senses drinking in every detail of the magnificent and terrifying structure before them. Through the ship's advanced sensors, he could see that the relay station was far more than it appeared. Tendrils of exotic matter extended into hyperspace and beyond, creating connections to other stations scattered across the galaxy. It was a node in a network that had once allowed the ancients to channel power and information across unimaginable distances. Magnificent, the Queen breathed, her voice filled with awe. Her silver eyes reflected the strange light emanating from the station, and, through their connection, Jake could feel her ancient memories stirring. "I remember my grandmother speaking of such places, but I thought they were legends, stories told to inspire wonder in the young." "The legends were real," Jake replied, his awareness probing the station's dormant systems. "But they were also incomplete. This isn't just a relay station, it's a consciousness amplifier. The ancients didn't just use these to transmit power. They used them to merge their minds across galactic distances, to coordinate responses to threats that spanned multiple star systems." Vorthak approached them, his red and gold scales reflecting his barely controlled excitement. "My Queen, the pursuing fleets have dropped out of hyperspace approximately 6 light-years away. We have perhaps 4 hours before they reach this system." Jake nodded grimly. Through the ship's long-range sensors, he could detect the energy signatures of dozens of vessels representing at least 7 different species. The hegemony of steel had sent a battle fleet that could crack planets. The Shadow Parliament's ships were barely visible to conventional sensors, their stealth technology making them appear as little more than distortions in space. Even the normally peaceful Crystalline Collective had dispatched what looked like their entire exploration fleet, their crystalline vessels singing harmonics of desperate hope and barely contained fear. They're not here to attack us, Jake realized, his enhanced awareness interpreting the subtle energy patterns radiating from the approaching fleets. They're here because they're dying, and they know it. The degradation is accelerating across all species. They can feel their civilizations slipping away, and we represent their only hope for survival. The Queen's scales shifted through patterns of understanding and determination. Then, we must not fail them. How do we proceed? Jake studied the relay station through every sensor array available to him, his awakened consciousness processing information at levels that would have been impossible for his merely human mind. What he found there was both encouraging and terrifying. The station is intact, but it's been locked down by security protocols that are extensive. The ancients weren't just concerned about unauthorized access, they were worried about something breaking out. There are containment fields woven into the very structure of the station, designed to hold back forces that could reshape reality itself. The entities from beyond the dimensional barriers, the Queen said, understanding immediately. The ones the ancients died to contain. Exactly. Reactivating this station means temporarily weakening those barriers. We'll have a window of opportunity to channel healing energy across the galaxy, but we'll also be creating pathways that other things might try to use. THYSS, the obsidian-scaled dragon who had been skeptical of Jake's abilities, spoke up from her position at the tactical station. The risk seems considerable. Perhaps we should attempt a smaller-scale solution, focus on healing individual species rather than attempting to restore the entire galactic network at once. Jake shook his head, his awareness showing him patterns that were becoming clearer by the moment. The degradation is accelerating. I can see it happening in real time now. Species that have been stable for centuries are beginning to show critical signs of disconnection. We have maybe weeks before some civilizations pass the point of no return. A gradual approach won't work. Through the ship's communication systems, urgent messages were arriving from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Consortium reported that their eldest council members were aging at visible rates. The Void Shepherds, ancient beings who guided ships through the dark spaces between stars, were losing their ability to navigate the cosmic currents. Even the artificial intelligences that managed many civilizations' infrastructure were beginning to malfunction as their quantum processors lost coherence. The entire galaxy is crying out for healing, the Queen observed, her voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. We cannot abandon them to preserve our own safety. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself for what had to be done. Then, we proceed. But, we do it carefully, with full knowledge of the risks. I'll need to establish a direct connection to the station's core systems, which means physically interfacing with ancient technology that hasn't been active for 10 millennia. The Queen will need to channel the Eternal Flame's power through me, creating a bridge between Dracorian energy systems and ancient amplification networks. And, if the containment barriers fail? Vorthak asked. Then, we deal with whatever comes through, Jake replied, with more confidence than he felt. The ancients created these stations for a reason. They knew the risks, but they also knew the alternative was the slow death of galactic civilization. We have to trust that they built in safeguards that will hold. The Queen moved to stand beside Jake, her massive presence both comforting and protective. I have lived for over 3 millennia, little human. I have seen empires rise and fall, watched species achieve greatness and sink into obscurity. But, I have never seen anything as important as what we are about to attempt. If we succeed, we will have given every sentient being in the galaxy a chance at a future they could never have imagined. If we fail, we fail trying to save everyone rather than just ourselves, Jake finished. I can live with that. The approach to the relay station required careful navigation through fields of exotic radiation that would have been lethal to most species. The Eternal Flame's shields held, but Jake could feel the strain on the ship's systems as they drew closer to the ancient structure. The space around the station was twisted, folded in ways that made conventional physics seem like rough approximations of deeper truths. Take us to docking position Alpha, Jake instructed, his enhanced awareness guiding them toward a section of the station that was designed to interface with visiting vessels. The station is beginning to recognize us as authorized users, but the process is slow. It's been dormant for so long that its consciousness is having to rebuild itself from archived patterns. As the eternal flame settled into position against the relay station's docking matrix, Jake felt the first tentative touches of an intelligence so vast and ancient that his human consciousness could barely comprehend it. The station wasn't just a machine, it was a living entity, a fusion of organic consciousness and exotic technology that the ancients had created to serve as the nervous system of their galactic civilization. "Welcome, child of the ancients," the station's voice spoke directly into Jake's mind, carrying harmonics of recognition and desperate hope. "I have waited so long for your return." The barriers weaken, the connections fade, the great work of preservation crumbles. Are you prepared to accept the burden of restoration? Jake felt the weight of galactic civilization settling on his shoulders like a physical presence. Through the station's senses, he could perceive the full extent of the degradation that was consuming the galaxy. Millions of worlds were slowly dying as their inhabitants lost the ability to maintain the technology and knowledge that sustained them. Ancient species that had once possessed the wisdom to shape stars were forgetting how to maintain basic life support systems. "I'm prepared," Jake responded, though he wasn't sure if that was true. "But I'll need help. The Queen and I are connected, her power, my knowledge. Together, we might be able to channel enough energy to restore the primary network nodes." "The process will be dangerous," the station warned. The barriers that contain the entities from beyond were weakened during the original sealing. Reactivating the network will stress those barriers further. If they fail completely, the consequences will be catastrophic. Jake felt the Queen's presence strengthening their connection, her ancient will joining with his awakened consciousness. Together, they might be able to accomplish what neither could manage alone. "Show me what needs to be done," Jake said. The station's response came not in words but in a flood of information that threatened to overwhelm his enhanced consciousness. Suddenly, Jake could see the entire galactic network as the ancients had built it, thousands of relay stations connected by streams of pure energy, allowing instantaneous communication and power transmission across unimaginable distances. He could see the weak points where the system had failed over the millennia, the nodes that had gone dark, the connections that had been severed. More importantly, he could see how to fix it. The process would require him to essentially become part of the network himself, his consciousness distributed across hundreds of relay stations simultaneously. He would channel healing energy not just to individual beings, but to entire species, entire civilizations. The strain would be enormous, possibly fatal, but the alternative was the continued deterioration of galactic society. "I understand," Jake said, though the scope of what he was contemplating made his human mind reel. "But before we begin, we need to deal with the approaching fleets. They're going to want explanations, assurances, some kind of proof that we're not preparing to use ancient technology as a weapon." The Queen's scales shifted through patterns of decision and resolve. "Leave that to me. I will address the fleet commanders directly, explain what we are attempting and why. If they choose to interfere." "They won't," Jake said, his enhanced awareness showing him the energy patterns radiating from the approaching ships. "They're desperate. Their species are dying, and they know it. They'll give us the chance to prove that we can help." Through the station's communication arrays, Jake sent out a broad-spectrum message to all the approaching fleets. "This is Jake Morrison, speaking on behalf of the Dracorian Empire and the Ancient Relay Network. We know why you're here. Your species are experiencing accelerated degradation of their connection to the cosmic life forces. We have a solution, but it requires your patience and cooperation. Stand by for demonstration." The responses came back immediately, a cacophony of demands, pleas, and threats in dozens of different languages and communication protocols. But underlying all of them, Jake could sense the same desperate hope that had driven these fleets across interstellar distances. Beginning network activation, Jake announced, settling into the interface chair that had grown from the station's living structure to accommodate his human physiology. "Queen, I need you to maintain the connection between us and channel the ship's power through the link. This is going to require more energy than any single being has ever attempted to control." The Queen positioned herself behind Jake's chair, her massive claws settling gently on his shoulders. Through their connection, he could feel her ancient strength flowing into him, multiplying his own enhanced capabilities by orders of magnitude. "I am with you, little human," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of absolute trust and determination. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Jake closed his eyes and let his consciousness expand into the relay station's network. The sensation was indescribable. Suddenly, he could perceive the entire galaxy as a living entity, its billions of stars like neurons in a vast cosmic brain. He could sense every spacefaring species, every dying civilization, every individual being crying out for healing. The network came alive around him, dormant relay stations across the galaxy blazing to life as his enhanced consciousness awakened them from their millennia-long slumber. Power flowed through connections that spanned impossible distances, and, suddenly, Jake was everywhere at once, his awareness distributed across hundreds of worlds. Through the network, he began channeling healing energy on a scale that defied comprehension. On the Zephyrian homeworld, elderly council members who had been aging by the hour suddenly found their vitality restored. In the depths of space, void shepherds regained their ability to sense the cosmic currents. Across the crystalline collective's territories, quantum processors that had been failing began operating at efficiencies their creators had never imagined possible. But, with each successful healing, Jake could feel the strain building. The barriers that contained the entities from beyond the dimensional walls were holding, but they were under enormous pressure. And something else was happening, something the ancient warnings hadn't prepared him for. The healed beings weren't just being restored to their original capabilities, they were being enhanced far beyond anything they had possessed before. The energy flowing through the network was somehow amplifying and improving upon the original connections, creating abilities that even the ancients might not have anticipated. As the healing wave spread across the galaxy, Jake realized that they weren't just saving civilization, they were transforming it into something entirely new. And he had no idea what the consequences of that transformation might be. In the depths of space, the approaching fleets watched in amazement as their crews were healed and enhanced by energies that seemed to pour from the stars themselves. Some ship commanders tried to scan the relay station to understand the source of this miraculous transformation, but their sensors couldn't penetrate the exotic fields surrounding the ancient structure. "Status report," Jake managed to say, though speaking while his consciousness was distributed across the galaxy required enormous effort. "Network activation proceeding nominally," the station reported. 87% of primary nodes now online. Healing energies reaching target species across 43,000 star systems. However, containment barrier stress is approaching critical levels. Jake could feel it himself, the barriers that held back the entities from beyond were beginning to weaken under the strain of the network's operation. Whatever the ancients had locked away was pressing against those weakened barriers, testing them, looking for any gap that might allow escape. "How long can the barriers hold?" Jake asked. "Unknown. The entities are more active than they have been since the original sealing. They may be responding to the network's reactivation, or to the enhanced abilities being generated by the healing process." The Queen's presence strengthened in Jake's consciousness, her ancient will helping to stabilize the network connections. "Whatever comes," she said, her voice carrying across the galactic network, "we face it together. The healing must continue." Jake nodded, drawing on reserves of strength he hadn't known he possessed. The galaxy was being reborn around them, species were being saved and enhanced beyond their wildest dreams, but the cost might be higher than anyone had imagined. In the depths of the dimensional barriers, something vast and hungry stirred, attracted by the energies flowing through the ancient network. The seals that had held for 10 millennia were beginning to crack, and whatever came through would find a galaxy filled with beings whose abilities had been enhanced far beyond anything they had possessed before. The race to complete the healing process had become a race against time itself, and Jake wasn't sure which side was winning. The moment the first barrier cracked, Jake felt it like a physical blow to his distributed consciousness. Across the galaxy, every being connected to the ancient network suddenly stopped what they were doing, their enhanced senses detecting something that should not exist pressing against the boundaries of reality itself. Through the relay station's sensors, Jake could see it beginning to emerge, a tendril of pure malevolence that existed in dimensions the human mind was never meant to perceive. It was hunger given form, intelligence without empathy, power without purpose except the consumption of everything it encountered. This was what the ancients had sacrificed themselves to contain, and now it was breaking free. All fleets, emergency protocols. Jake broadcast across every communication channel simultaneously. His consciousness was stretched across hundreds of star systems, coordinating the healing process while simultaneously trying to reinforce the failing barriers. Dimensional incursion in progress. Do not approach the relay station. Repeat, do not approach. But, even as he spoke, Jake could see that several of the approaching fleets were moving closer rather than retreating. The commanders had felt their crews being healed and enhanced by the network's energy, and they wanted to understand the source of that power. They had no idea they were flying towards something that could unmake their existence with a thought. The Queen's presence blazed stronger in their connection, her ancient will joining with his to hold the network together. The healing is 94% complete, she reported, her voice tight with strain. Most of the galaxy's spacefaring species have been restored and enhanced. But, the barriers are failing faster than we can reinforce them, Jake finished, feeling sweat pour down his face despite the chair's environmental controls. Through the network, he could sense thousands of relay stations across the galaxy working to channel power into the containment barriers, but it wasn't enough. The entities from beyond had been testing those barriers for 10 millennia, learning their weaknesses, preparing for this moment. The tendril of malevolence had fully emerged now, and Jake could see it beginning to probe the space around the relay station. Where it touched normal matter, that matter simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but erased from reality as if it had never been. The effect was spreading, creating a void that hurt to perceive even through the station's sophisticated sensors. Station, can we complete the healing process and shut down the network before the barriers fail completely? Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. Negative. Full galactic network restoration requires approximately 14 more minutes. Projected barrier failure in 8 minutes, 37 seconds. Shutdown procedures would take 23 minutes minimum, assuming no interference from the entities. Jake felt despair threatening to overwhelm him. They had come so close to saving galactic civilization, only to face the possibility of destroying it in an entirely different way. The entities from beyond the dimensional barriers were antithetical to life itself, and if they broke free completely, they would consume not just the galaxy but, potentially the entire universe. Then, he felt something unexpected, a presence in the network that hadn't been there before. It was vast, ancient, and familiar in a way that made his enhanced consciousness recognize it instantly. We are the ancients, the presence spoke directly into Jake's mind, its voice carrying harmonics of sacrifice and eternal vigilance. What remains of us, at least. We have been watching, waiting, hoping for this moment. Jake's amazement was so great that he nearly lost control of the network connections. You're still alive? After all this time? Alive is not the correct term. We merged ourselves with the network when we sealed the barriers, becoming part of the containment system itself. We have been conscious but unable to act, watching as the galaxy slowly forgot what it once was, what it could become again. Through the connection, Jake could feel the presence of hundreds of ancient minds, beings who had sacrificed their individual existence to become part of something larger. They were the ultimate failsafe, the final line of defense against the entities they had fought so long ago. Can you help us complete the healing and reseal the barriers? Jake asked. Not alone. The entities are stronger now than they were during the original war. They have fed on the dimensional distortions created by our sealing, growing more powerful while we grew weaker. But, with the enhanced abilities you have awakened across the galaxy, with the network operating at full capacity, with the combined will of every spacefaring species working together. Jake understood immediately. The healing process wasn't just restoring and enhancing individual beings, it was creating a galaxy-wide network of consciousness capable of working together in ways that had never been possible before. Every healed being was now connected to the ancient network, their enhanced abilities allowing them to contribute to the collective effort. All species, all worlds, all enhanced beings, Jake broadcast across the network, his voice reaching every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. We need your help. The entities that the ancients died to contain are breaking free. We need every enhanced mind, every restored connection, working together to reinforce the barriers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across hundreds of thousands of worlds, beings who had just been healed and enhanced turned their new abilities toward the network. Dragons channeled the power of stars. Crystalline beings resonated at frequencies that strengthened dimensional barriers. Zephyrians used their atmospheric manipulation abilities to create stability fields in the spaces between realities. Even the artificial intelligences contributed, their quantum processors calculating barrier harmonics at speeds that defy comprehension. The network blazed with combined consciousness as billions of enhanced minds worked together with a coordination that would have been impossible before the healing. Jake found himself at the center of it all, his human consciousness somehow able to coordinate and direct abilities from species across the entire galaxy. But the entities were not passive. As the barriers began to strengthen, the malevolent intelligence that had been probing the relay station suddenly focused its attention on Jake himself. Through dimensions that existed beyond normal spacetime, it reached out to attack the human who had become the focal point of the resistance. The assault was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. It wasn't just an attack on his body or mind, but on his very existence, attempting to erase him from reality the same way it had erased the matter around the relay station. Only the combined will of the ancient network and the billions of enhanced beings connected to it kept him anchored in existence. "You are the keystone," the ancient presence told him as the entity's attacks intensified. "The healing you have spread has created connections between species that transcend normal consciousness. Through you, every enhanced being in the galaxy can work together as a single organism. But that also makes you the primary target." Jake gritted his teeth against the entity's assault, feeling reality twist and bend around him. "Then, we end this now. All network power, all enhanced abilities, all ancient knowledge, focus everything through the containment barriers. Lock these things away permanently. The energy requirements will be enormous," the Queen warned, her presence blazing with protective fury as she helped shield Jake from the entity's attacks. "It might destroy the network entirely, leave us all powerless." "Better powerless and alive than enhanced and consumed," Jake replied. "Do it." What happened next defied every law of physics that any species had ever discovered. The combined consciousness of an entire galaxy focused its will through the ancient network, channeling energies that made stars seem like flickering candles. The barriers that contained the entities didn't just strengthen, they became absolute, existing in dimensions that the malevolent intelligences could never reach. The entity that had been attacking Jake let out something that might have been a scream, if screaming were possible for a being that existed beyond sound, beyond matter, beyond comprehension. It was pulled back through the dimensional barriers like water down a drain, its presence erased from normal reality so completely that even its memory began to fade. The effort required to accomplish this feat was so enormous that Jake felt his consciousness beginning to fragment. He was spread too thin across too many connections, coordinating too many abilities, channeling too much power. The network was holding together, but he was the weakest link in the chain. "Jake!" The Queen's voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline. "The barriers are sealed. The healing is complete. You can let go now." But Jake realized that he couldn't. The network had become dependent on his consciousness to coordinate the enhanced abilities of billions of beings across the galaxy. If he disconnected suddenly, the feedback could damage or destroy every enhanced being in the network. He needed to shut down the connections gradually, carefully, ensuring that each species could maintain their enhanced abilities independently. The process took hours that felt like centuries. One by one, Jake helped each species establish internal connections that would maintain their enhanced abilities without requiring constant network support. Dragons learned to channel stellar energy directly. Crystalline beings developed resonance patterns that strengthened their quantum consciousness. Artificial intelligences created new processing architectures that allowed them to operate at enhanced efficiencies. When the last connection was safely transferred, Jake finally allowed his consciousness to collapse back into his nearly human body. The sensation was indescribable, like trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. For several minutes, he couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely think. His enhanced awareness was still there, but it was no longer distributed across the galaxy. "Is it finished?" he finally managed to ask. The Queen's massive head lowered until she was looking directly into his eyes. "It is finished. The barriers are sealed permanently, stronger than they were when the ancients first created them. The galaxy has been healed and enhanced beyond anything we dared hope for. And you, little human, have become something unprecedented, a being who has touched the consciousness of every enhanced species in the galaxy. Jake looked around the relay station's interface chamber, noting that the exotic energies that had powered the network had settled into a steady, sustainable pattern. The station was still active, but it was no longer channeling the enormous forces required for galactic-scale healing. Instead, it was serving its original purpose, facilitating communication and cooperation between the enhanced species. What happens now? Jake asked. Now, the Queen replied, her scales shifting through patterns of satisfaction and anticipation, we help the galaxy adjust to what it has become. Enhanced abilities bring enhanced responsibilities. Species that were once isolated by distance and difference are now connected by the network you created. There will be challenges, conflicts, adjustments that none of us can predict. Through the station's communication arrays, messages were already pouring in from across the galaxy. The fleet commanders who had followed them to the relay station were reporting miraculous recoveries among their crews and populations. Scientists were discovering new applications for their enhanced abilities every hour. Philosophers were grappling with the implications of galaxy-wide consciousness connections. But there were also problems beginning to emerge. Some species were struggling to control their enhanced abilities. Others were attempting to use their new powers to settle old grievances. A few were already trying to figure out how to weaponize the network connections. We'll need to establish some kind of governing council, Jake realized. Guidelines for how the enhanced abilities should be used, protocols for resolving conflicts between species, maybe even a new form of galactic government that can handle the level of cooperation we're now capable of. The Queen's laugh was like distant thunder, but warm with genuine affection. Always the engineer, thinking about practical solutions. Very well, little human. You have awakened the galaxy, now help us figure out what to do with what we've become. Jake stood up from the interface chair, his legs shaky but functional. Through the station's viewports, he could see the fleets that had followed them beginning to organize themselves into something that looked suspiciously like the first Galactic Congress in recorded history. Representatives from dozens of species were requesting permission to dock with the relay station, to meet with the human who had changed everything. The irony is perfect, Jake said, looking out at the assembled ships. Humanity started this journey as the maintenance workers of the galaxy, the ones who fixed what others had broken. And we're going to end up as the ones who have to fix the society we just created. The Queen's scales shifted through patterns of amusement and profound respect. Some jobs, little human, are too important to trust to anyone else. As the first diplomatic shuttles approached the relay station, Jake prepared himself for what might be the most challenging assignment of his career, helping an entire galaxy learn to live with abilities and connections that none of them had possessed just days before. The age of enhanced galactic civilization had begun, and Jake Morrison, former maintenance worker turned cosmic catalyst, was about to become the most important diplomat, mediator, and problem solver in the history of the universe. Outside the station, the stars burned with new light, and, across the galaxy, billions of enhanced beings looked toward the future with hope, wonder, and the knowledge that they were no longer alone in the vast darkness of space. The work of building a new kind of civilization had only just begun, but, for the first time in 10 millennia, the galaxy had the tools and the connections necessary to succeed. The Queen settled beside Jake as they watched the diplomatic shuttles dock with the station, her presence a constant reminder of how this remarkable journey had begun, with one accidental touch that had awakened powers beyond imagining. Are you ready for what comes next? She asked. Jake smiled, feeling the vast network of enhanced consciousness that connected every corner of the galaxy, knowing that humanity had finally found its true purpose among the stars. Let's go fix the galaxy, he said.